Welcome, dear viewers, to a journey through one of the most extraordinary and tragic moments. In human history, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in T-Cirgul AD. Today, we travel back nearly 2,000 years to the bustling Roman city of Pompeii, a place alive with laughter, trade, love, and dreams, until the skies darkened and the earth itself turned against its people. In this documentary, you will walk the streets of Pompeii, stand among its temples, and feel the heartbeat of a city unaware of its approaching doom. We will uncover not just the story of fire and ash, but the lives of those who lived, struggled, and perished in the shadow of a volcano. Through vivid storytelling, character reenactments, and immersive imagery, we will relive their final hours and the eternal legacy they left behind. This is not merely a story of destruction. It is a story of humanity, of resilience, of the silent whispers preserved in stone and ash for centuries. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin our descent into history and witness the day Pompeii was frozen in time. Imagine waking up to a normal day, only to see the sky turn black, the ground tremble beneath your feet, and fire raining down from the heavens. This is the story of Pompeii, the day an entire city was swallowed by a mountain's fury. Subscribe for more history, like and comment. If you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth, this is history. And it begins here. The city of Pompeii sparkled beneath the Mediterranean sun, nestled along the Bay of Naples, its stone walls gleaming with the pride of Roman engineering. Streets buzzed with voices, vendors calling out their goods, children laughing, the sound of iron striking iron from the blacksmith's forge. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a bakery, mingling with the tang of salted fish from the bustling markets. Pompeii was alive, radiant, and unaware of the shadow looming above it. Mount Vesuvius stood silently in the distance, a mountain cloaked in lush greenery. To the people of Pompeii, it was no threat, merely a backdrop to their lives, a provider of fertile soil and vineyards that produced the region's famous wines. Farmers tended to their grapes, aristocrats reclined in shaded gardens, and sailors prepared their ships to carry goods across the empire. Life was rich, orderly, and full of promise. The city was not merely a place of survival, but a center of culture. Painted frescoes decorated villa walls. Fountains gushed with water from Roman aqueducts, and the amphitheater echoed with the roars of gladiators and the cheers of crowds. Pompeii was a jewel of Campania, a reflection of Rome itself, ambitious, sophisticated, and full of vigor. Yet, as we walk its streets in our imagination, a subtle irony hangs in the air. The very mountain that nurtured this city would soon bury it. The voices that fill its streets, merchants, mothers, lovers, and slaves, would one day be silenced in an instant. But here, in this moment, they live, unknowing of the fate that awaits them. This is the Pompeii we must first meet, not the city of death, but the city of life, a city vibrant with dreams, laughter, and humanity. For only by knowing how full of life Pompeii was can we truly understand the tragedy that followed. As dawn breaks over Pompeii, the city awakens with a rhythm that has pulsed for generations. Cobblestone streets echo with the footsteps of merchants setting up their stalls, the braying of donkeys laden with goods, and the chatter of townsfolk beginning their day. The bakeries, always the heart of morning life, fill the air with the smell of fresh bread. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron into tools and weapons. their sparks flashing like stars against the pale morning light. In the villas, servants bustle about, preparing morning meals of bread, olives, and cheese for their wealthy masters. Farmers from the countryside arrive with baskets of figs, grapes, and pomegranates, their backs bent but their voices strong as they call out their wares. Children spill into the streets, chasing hoops or playing dice games, their laughter mingling with the clatter of carts. In the forum, senators, philosophers, and local leaders gather, speaking of politics, taxes, and rumors from distant Rome. Women in stolas and cloaks visit bathhouses, gossiping as they soak in warm pools fed by aqueducts. For every class, from slaves to senators, Pompeii offers both labor and leisure. The amphitheater, a proud landmark of the city, fills with anticipation for the next gladiatorial games. Training schools echo with the clash of wooden swords, where young men prepare for combat and glory. At night, taverns come alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of wine cups. By oil lamp, poets recite verses, actors rehearse plays, and musicians pluck at lyres, filling the air with melodies that will never be heard again. This is the Pompeii of the living, a city that mirrors the empire itself. Here, the people love, labor, feast, argue, and dream. And though Vesuvius looms above, silent and watchful, no one gives it a second thought. For now, the city breathes with confidence and joy, blind to the dark destiny that waits beyond the horizon. Pompeii was more than a city of trade. It was a city of refinement, luxury, and pleasure, a smaller mirror of Rome itself. The wealthy elite showcased their status in grand villas, decorated with vivid frescoes of gods, myths, and feasts. Mosaics adorned their floors, capturing scenes of fish swimming, gladiators fighting, and lovers embracing. These homes were not simply dwellings, but statements of wealth and sophistication. Pompeii's. The streets of Pompeii offered a glimpse into the Roman way of living. At public baths, the hum of voices echoed as men and women indulged in warm pools, steam rooms, and cold plunges. Bathhouses were more than places of cleansing. They were centers of social life, where deals were struck, friendships nurtured, and gossip passed like wine from one hand to another. In the bustling forum, the heart of civic life, magistrates made proclamations and philosophers debated beneath marble columns. The clinking of coins filled the air as traders exchanged goods from far-off lands. The futron for olive oil from Spain, glassware from Syria, spices from the East. Pompeii thrived on diversity, its citizens enjoying the luxuries brought from every corner of the empire. Entertainment, too, was essential. The amphitheater loomed as a symbol of both Rome-esque glory and its brutality. Here, gladiators clashed in bloody contests, cheered on by roaring crowds. Families gathered in excitement, nobles displayed their power by sponsoring games, and slaves fought for survival or honor. The theater offered another kind of spectacle, plays of comedy and tragedy, echoing with the laughter and tears of audiences beneath the Mediterranean sky. But life was not only grand for the wealthy. Taverns bustled with sailors, slaves, and commoners, drinking cheap wine and playing dice until late into the night. Brothels promised forbidden pleasures, and graffiti scrawled across stone walls revealed secrets, insults, and declarations of love. Pompeii was, in every sense, alive, sensual, indulgent, and fully human. Yet beneath all this beauty and excess lay an unspoken fragility. The people of Pompeii built monuments to permanence, believing Rome eternal. They decorated their walls with scenes of gods, useful, never suspecting that their true fate lay not in the stars, but in the mountain that loomed silently above them. For now, the city thrived, every stone and fresco glowing with life. The Roman way of living was at its height, and it would be preserved, not by intention, but by tragedy. Religion pulsed through every stone of Pompeii. The city was a living altar to the gods of Rome, where divine presence was woven into daily life. No meal began without a prayer, no journey started without an offering, and no victory, whether in battle or in the marketplace, was celebrated without the blessing of the gods. The temple of Apollo stood proud in the Forum, its columns rising toward the sky, dedicated to the god of light, prophecy, and healing. Citizens gathered here to leave offerings, fruits, coins, and sometimes even small animal sacrifices. Priests in flowing robes chanted prayers, their voices echoing against the marble walls, smoke from incense curling into the air. The people believed Apollo watched over their city, granting them fortune and health. Nearby, the temple of Jupiter towered above the Forum, the guardian of laws and justice. His statue, stern and powerful, gazed down upon the crowds. To defy him was to defy Rome itself. Worshippers bowed low, hoping for favor in court cases, protection in trade, or strength in political ambition. The goddess Venus was also deeply beloved, for Pompeii claimed her as its protector. In her temple, decorated with marble and adorned with frescoes, women prayed for love, beauty, and fertility. Brides offered garlands before marriage, while mothers thanked her for safe childbirth. To the citizens, Venus was both divine and personal, a goddess whose touch reached into every home. Everywhere in Pompeii, shrines and household altars dotted the streets and homes. Families made offerings at their lauraria, small household shrines to guardian spirits, placing food, wine, and little figurines on shelves carved into the walls. Even slaves paused before these shrines, whispering prayers for mercy or freedom. Festivals transformed the city into a spectacle of devotion. Processions wound through the streets, filled with dancers, musicians, and citizens bearing flowers. Animals were sacrificed in the open square, their smoke rising to the heavens as the crowd cheered. Religion was not a private matter, but a public celebration, binding the people together in the belief that the gods walked among them. Yet for all their faith, the gods remained silent. No priest, no omen, no dream warned of the danger that lay sleeping in the mountain's heart. The temples, filled with incense and prayer, stood as monuments of hope, but in time, they would become ruins buried beneath. For now, the citizens of Pompeii prayed with full hearts, certain that their gods would protect them forever. High above Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius rose like a giant watching over the city. To the people, it was not a threat but a blessing. Its slopes were covered in fertile vineyards, producing wines so famous they were shipped to Rome and beyond. Farmers praised the mountain soil for giving them bountiful harvests. Never suspecting that it was born of fire, children climbed its lower hills to chase goats and gather wildflowers. Hunters trekked into its forests, returning with deer and wild boar. From the city's streets, Vesuvius was a familiar sight, a green and gentle backdrop to daily life. Few remembered the ancient stories whispered by elders that long ago, fire and smoke had erupted from the mountain. For centuries, it had slept in silence, and so the people thought it tame. Yet some signs went unnoticed. Small tremors shook the earth now and then, rattling pots and startling livestock. Sulphurous smells occasionally drifted from cracks in the ground. Birds sometimes avoided the slopes, circling wide as if wary of what lay within. But life continued, for the people of Pompeii trusted the permanence of their world. The mountain, however, was not asleep. It was stirring. Deep within, Molten rock churned and cracked, building pressure with each passing day. The silence was an illusion, a mask hiding the inevitable. Poets wrote verses about the beauty of the landscape. Philosophers debated under the mountain's gaze, considering fate and the will of the gods. Lovers met in its shade, swearing oaths as eternal as the hills. To them, Vesuvius symbolized strength, a natural monument of enduring life. But in truth, the mountain's shadow was not one of protection. It was one of doom. Every house, every temple, every laugh that echoed in the streets stood in its path. In this chapter of Pompeii's story, the volcano remained quiet, its green slopes hiding a sleeping monster. The people lived with joy, faith, and ambition, blind to the truth that their world rested upon the edge of fire. Pompeii was more than a provincial town. It was a hub of commerce pulsing with wealth drawn from across the empire. Its harbor welcomed ships from Greece, Egypt, and Spain. Amphorae of olive oil, fine wines, glassware, spices, and silks were traded in the bustling marketplace. Merchants boasted of their exotic wares, while buyers haggled with sharp tongues and clever smiles. The streets revealed Pompeii's prosperity. Elegant villas housed mosaics imported from Alexandria, marble columns from Greece, and statues of Roman gods carved by master sculptors. Even common households displayed small luxuries: bronze lamps, painted pottery, jewelry of simple but enduring beauty. The forum bustled with economic energy. Bankers exchanged coins, scribes recorded contracts on wax tablets, and auctioneers shouted prices over the roar of the crowd. Every deal reflected the lifeblood of the empire, a connection between distant lands and Pompeii's thriving streets. Pompeii was alive with opportunity. Freed slaves opened businesses, farmers sold their produce, and ambitious traders sought fortune. Wealth was measured not only in coin, but in influence. Patrons protected clients, and clients repaid with loyalty. Yet, beneath this glittering commerce, the city's fate was sealed. The very trade routes that connected Pompeii to Rome would one day carry news of its destruction. Pompeii's streets were alive with countless voices, ordinary people whose lives stitched together the city's identity. The baker rose before dawn, kneading dough by lamplight. The blacksmith hammered iron into shape. The slave carried baskets through crowded alleys. The senator debated laws in the forum. Each voice was a thread, weaving the fabric of Pompeii's soul. Among them were Marcus, the baker, whose loaves fed the people; Livia, a merchantess wife, who carefully selected olives for her family; Lucius, a young slave, who worked tirelessly yet dreamed of freedom; and Gaius, a senator, who strode proudly, carrying the weight of Roman authority. Their lives intersected in ways both mundane and profound. A mother's lullaby echoed through narrow streets, while soldiers trained in the distance. Children's laughter filled courtyards where artisans painted frescoes. Poets composed verses, capturing fleeting moments of joy. These voices carried the heartbeat of Pompeii. It is these people, not emperors or generals, who form the heart of history. For when the ash fell, it was their voices that were silenced. Festivals in Pompeii transformed the city into a carnival of joy. Streets filled with music, laughter, and color as citizens celebrated the gods and the abundance of life. Processions marched with flowers and banners. Priests led sacrifices in the forum, while musicians played flutes and drums. Dancers twirled in bright costumes, their movements echoing ancient traditions. Children clutched sweets, merchants offered wine, and crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder to witness spectacles. In the amphitheater, gladiators paraded before combat, their muscles glistening in the sun. Families cheered, Nobles displayed wealth in extravagant seating, and food vendors shouted over the noise. The festival was a mirror of Roman life, joy mixed with ritual, spectacle mixed with belief. For one day, rich and poor, slave and senator, joined together in celebration. Yet the joy carried an undertone of fragility. The laughter that rang out beneath Vesuvius would one day vanish into silence. Even in times of joy, the earth beneath Pompeii whispered warnings. Small tremors shook cups from tables and rattled amphorae against villa walls. Farmers noticed strange cracks in the soil. Animals grew restless, dogs barking at unseen threats, horses shying away from the mountainous slopes. But the people accustomed to such disturbances paid little attention. Earthquakes were not uncommon in Campania. Years earlier, a violent quake had damaged temples and homes. Yet the city had rebuilt stronger than ever. For most, these new tremors were nothing more than the earth shifting in its eternal sleep. Yet some grew uneasy. Philosophers wondered if the gods were displeased. Superstitious women whispered of omens, strange clouds, unusual bird flights, shadows that seemed unnatural. But the warnings were dismissed. Life was too busy, too prosperous, too full of joy to worry about distant rumblings. And so the people lived, oblivious to the mountain's restless heart. As the sun set over Pompeii, the city glowed in golden light. Families dined together, sharing bread, olives, and wine. In the courtyards of villas, fountains gurgled softly, and lamps flickered against painted walls. Children drifted into sleep as lullabies echoed through narrow streets. Lovers strolled under the stars, whispering promises of tomorrow. The forum quieted, merchants closing stalls, priests extinguishing temple flames. Sailors secured their ships in the harbor, preparing for voyages at dawn. From the amphitheater to the taverns, laughter faded into the night. Above it all, Vesuvius loomed in silence. Its slopes, darkened by shadow, seemed harmless, a familiar giant guarding the city. No one suspected that beneath the stillness, fire gathered. This was Pompeii's final peaceful evening, the calm before the storm. A city alive with love, ambition, and dreams. Moments away from its fate, the day began like any other. In Pompeii, merchants shouted in the forum, women carried baskets of fruit, and gladiators trained in the amphitheater. But then, without warning, the earth growled. A low rumble shook the ground, and walls shivered as though struck by invisible hands. Clay cups toppled, amphorae cracked against stone floors, and frightened animals brayed in panic. People rushed into the streets, their eyes wide with fear. Mothers clutched their children. Shopkeepers ran to secure their goods. Dogs barked and strained against their leashes, and birds scattered into the darkening sky. For a moment, silence fell as all eyes turned toward the looming mountain. But Vesuvius remained quiet, its green slopes unmoved. Slowly, the city exhaled. Nervous laughter bubbled through the streets. "Just another tremor," someone said. "The gods are restless," muttered another. But soon reassurance returned. Earthquakes were not uncommon here. Only a few remembered the great quake years earlier that had toppled temples and broken walls. They had rebuilt then. Surely this was no different, life resumed. But unease lingered. In the shadows of the forum, old women whispered of omens. Priests cast anxious glances at the temples, wondering if the gods were displeased. Farmers noticed their livestock restless, refusing to graze near the mountainous base. Children, usually quick to laughter, clung to their mothers' skirts. The tremor was small, but it left an invisible crack in Pompeii's confidence. The city carried on, yet something had shifted. It was as though the earth had spoken, and no one could quite ignore its voice. Above them all, Vesuvius stood silent, its slumber nearly at an end. After the tremor, life in Pompeii slowly resumed its rhythm. Yet those closest to nature sensed what humans ignored. Animals grew restless, their instincts sounding alarms the people dismissed. In the streets, dogs barked endlessly, pulling at their leashes and refusing food. Farmers' oxen stamped nervously in their stalls, their wide eyes rolling with unease. Horses at the stables neighed frantically, striking their hooves against the ground until sparks flew. Even birds, once a constant presence above the city, began to vanish. Flocks scattered wildly, wheeling in strange patterns, before fleeing from the looming mountain. In the villa courtyards, pet dogs whined and cowered under tables. Cats hissed and clawed at doors, desperate to escape. Livestock refused to graze near the base of Vesuvius, pulling stubbornly at their ropes. The people of Pompeii laughed uneasily. "The beasts are mad," some said. "It is the summer heat," others insisted. A few recalled ancient tales of animals sensing disaster before men, but their words were drowned in the noise of the market. Still, the animals did not lie. They felt what humans could not yet understand. The mountain was alive, and its fury was building. Days after the tremor, a strange change appeared in the sky. At first it was subtle, a faint wisp of smoke curling from Vesuvius. Many ignored it, dismissing it as a passing cloud. But as the days passed, the plume grew darker, stretching higher, spreading like a stain across the heavens. Citizens shaded their eyes and whispered uneasily. Some pointed and laughed, joking that Vulcan, the god of fire, was stoking his forge. Priests grew troubled, offering sacrifices to appease the gods. Children asked their mothers why the sky no longer looked the same. Tiktifer. By evening, the sun's glow was dimmed by haze. The sky burned with strange colors, red at the horizon, gray above the mountain. Ash drifted down in tiny flakes, at first mistaken for dust. Some brushed it from their shoulders, chuckling, while others grew silent. The air thickened with a sulphurous scent, sharp and bitter. Citizens wrinkled their noses, muttering about foul omens. Yet the city continued to live. Markets opened, games were played, and laughter still echoed in taverns. But unease gnawed at the edges of Pompeii's joy. The sky was no longer the sky they knew. It had become the mountain S. First warning, as the plume above Vesuvius thickened, unease spread like wildfire through Pompeii's streets. Crowds gathered in the forum, debating in loud, anxious voices. Some claimed the gods were angry. Others insisted it was merely smoke from distant fires. Merchants complained that customers were distracted, priests hurried to temples, and mothers clutched their children close. Rumors swirled. Some said they saw fire glowing at the mountain's peak. Others swore they heard distant thunder from underground. Each whisper fueled panic. The once bustling streets of Pompeii now throbbed with uncertainty. Fights broke out among the fearful. A merchant accused a rival of angering the gods with dishonest trade. A priest shouted warnings, calling for immediate sacrifices. A group of sailors prepared to flee by sea, urging others to join them. Yet many resisted, too proud or too stubborn to abandon their homes. Fear painted every face. Yet, still the games were planned to go on. Markets opened with fewer customers, and daily life struggled against the creeping terror. The people of Pompeii stood divided between denial and dread, faith and reason. The mountain gave no answers. Only its silent plume grew darker, spreading wider, as though the sky itself were burning. In a modest home near the edge of Pompeii, a mother named Aelia sat with her children. The tremors had frightened them, and the strange sky had silenced their laughter. Her youngest clung to her arm, asking if the gods were angry. Her eldest stared out the window at the drifting ash, lips pressed tight. Aelia tried to smile, but fear gnawed at her heart. She had seen animals flee, felt the earth tremble, smelled the bitter air. She whispered prayers at the household shrine, offering bread and wine to the spirits of her ancestors. She begged for their protection. Her husband dismissed her fears. "It is nothing," he said, tightening his sandals. "For work, the city has seen worse." Yet his eyes betrayed doubt as he glanced toward the mountain. That night, as lamps flickered against the painted walls, Alia held her children close. She hummed lullabies, stroking their hair, even as her own heart raced. Outside, distant rumbles echoed faintly. Like drums in the earth, Alia did not sleep. She stared at the shadows dancing on the walls, praying they would live to see another dawn. In the grand villa near the Forum, Senator Gaius Varro sat at a marble table, sipping spiced wine. His advisors murmured about the tremors, the restless animals, and the darkening sky. Citizens begged for reassurance, but Gaius raised his hand with calm authority. "There is no danger," he declared. "Pompeii stands strong. The gods would not abandon us. This mountain has watched over us for centuries. It is nothing more than smoke." His words carried across the Forum, bringing uneasy comfort to some, but frustration to others. Merchants worried about trade, mothers worried about children, but the senator's denial echoed louder than their fears. Behind his mask of confidence, though, Gaius's eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. He had seen the plume himself, rising like a dark banner above the city. He had heard the frightened cries of animals, the whispers of priests. Yet pride and politics chained him. Admitting danger would mean weakness, and weakness was something he could not afford. The people wanted hope, and so he gave them false reassurance. In doing so, he sealed their fate. For his words lulled many into staying when they should have fled. At midday, the mountain roared. A thunderous crack split the sky, and a column of smoke and ash burst upward with terrifying force. It rose higher and higher, forming a towering pillar that spread like a black pine tree across the heavens. The sound shook the earth, rattling walls and toppling jars. Citizens screamed, running into the streets as chunks of pumice rained down. Some fell to their knees, believing the gods had unleashed their wrath. Others shouted for their families, struggling to push through the panicked crowd. The sky darkened as ash thickened, blotting out the sun. Flames flickered at the mountain summit, glowing like the gates of the underworld. Pompeii was in chaos. Roofs cracked under the weight of falling stone. Dogs howled. Horses bolted through the streets. Merchants abandoned their stalls, their goods forgotten. Priests lifted their arms to the heavens, begging for mercy. The eruption had begun, and Pompeii's final day was underway. As the eruption intensified, crowds surged toward Pompeii's gates, desperate to escape. Families clutched bundles of belongings. Slaves carried their masters' treasures, and soldiers tried to keep order. The air was filled with coughing, shouting, and the crash of falling stone. At the Herculaneum gate, panic erupted as carts clogged the road. Oxen panicked, overturning wagons. People trampled one another in their desperation. At the Nucerian gate, guards shouted for calm, but their voices were drowned in the roar of the crowd. Some turned back, unable to face the chaos. Others pushed forward, their eyes wild with fear. Mothers screamed for missing children, while fathers shouted orders no one could hear. Above them all, the mountain spewed fire and ash, raining death on those too slow to flee. Many sought safety by sea. At the harbor, sailors rushed to ready their ships, urging citizens to board. Families pushed through the crowd, desperate to escape by water. The air was thick with ash, and the waves of the bay churned under falling stone. Ships strained against their moorings as panicked passengers clambered aboard. Cries filled the air, pleas for room, shouts of warning, screams of terror. But the harbor offered no salvation. Ash fell like rain, clogging sails and filling the decks. The sea itself turned dark, covered with floating pumice. Boats capsized under the weight, and terrified passengers were dragged into the water. Some ships never left the shore, sinking as their crews succumbed to suffocating air. The harbor, once a place of trade and prosperity, became a trap of death and despair. By now, Vesuvius was fully awake. The eruption intensified, sending shockwaves through the land. A towering column of ash stretched miles into the sky, blotting out the sun. Day turned to night. Thunderous booms echoed like war drums as the mountain hurled molten rock and burning gas. Lightning flashed within the cloud, illuminating the terrified city below. The air grew thick, choking those who breathed it. Ash piled on rooftops, causing them to crack and collapse. Streets filled with debris, blocking escape. The people of Pompeii, once proud and secure, now cowered in terror. Some prayed, some wept. Others screamed in anger at gods they felt had betrayed them. The mountain, indifferent to human suffering, unleashed its fury. And in its shadow, the final tragedy of Pompeii had begun. The sun vanished. What had begun as a faint haze grew into a choking darkness that swallowed Pompeii. By mid-afternoon, it was as dark as midnight. The streets once filled with laughter now echoed with cries, coughs, and prayers. Ash rained ceaselessly, piling on rooftops, clogging the streets, and choking the breath from anyone without a cloth to cover their mouth. Citizens stumbled blindly through the storm, clutching one another, their faces streaked with gray. Oil lamps flickered weakly. Unable to pierce the gloom, lightning cracked within the volcanic cloud, illuminating the chaos below in terrifying flashes. Each bolt revealed scenes of desperation, mothers dragging children, men carrying bundles of food, slaves running with stolen goods. The world was reduced to shadows and flashes of fire. Dogs howled, oxen bellowed, and horses screamed, their cries mingling with human voices. The air smelled of sulfur and burning stone. Pompeii, once vibrant and colorful, was now a city of ash. Some tried to flee, but the roads were blocked with debris. Others huddled in homes, praying to survive. But no place was safe. The sky itself was the enemy. Pompeii had entered its final night. The eruption grew more violent. Suddenly, from the mountain-s slopes, torrents of fire and ash surged downward, fast, unstoppable, like the breath of the gods themselves. The first pyroclastic flows tore through the surrounding countryside, flattening trees, incinerating farms, and silencing every living creature in their path. In Pompeii, a red glow lit the horizon as the fiery clouds advanced. People screamed that the gods had opened the gates of the underworld. The air grew hotter, suffocating, burning lungs with every breath. Sparks rained from the sky like fiery snow. Farms near the city vanished in an instant. Villages around the base of Vesuvius were consumed. Their cries carried briefly on the wind before silence returned. Survivors in Pompeii could only watch in horror, knowing the wave of destruction crept closer with every heartbeat. Priests raised their arms, calling to Apollo, Jupiter, and Venus for mercy. Families huddled together, trembling. Some tried to flee toward the harbor again, but the sea had already turned black with floating pumice. The mountain's wrath was no longer just smoke and ash. It was fire, alive and merciless. The streets of Pompeii became a labyrinth of terror. Roofs collapsed under the weight of ash, sending stone and wood crashing into alleys. Fires spread as oil lamps toppled. Families trying to escape found themselves trapped, blocked by rubble, blinded by ash, and deafened by the roar of the volcano. Mothers called desperately for children lost in the chaos. Fathers carried bundles of food and water, but dropped them as buildings collapsed. Slaves, free for the first time in the chaos, fled aimlessly, torn between escape and terror. The air was thick with screams. Some citizens fell where they stood, suffocating in the ash. Others pressed on, clawing through rubble to reach the gates. The city that had once thrived with markets, laughter, and festivals was now a cage of stone and fire. At the city gates, Roman soldiers tried to hold back the tide of panic. Their bronze armor gleamed dully under ash, helmets caked with soot. They shouted for order, forming lines with shields raised. But discipline faltered in the face of terror. Citizens pushed against them, desperate to escape. Soldiers struggled to maintain control, striking with the flats of their swords to drive people back. Some broke ranks, fleeing with their families, yet a few remained steadfast. Centurion Marcus Fabius planted his standard at the gate, rallying his men. "For Rome!" he cried, though his voice cracked with fear. His men closed ranks, protecting the weakest even as Pumice rained down. They could not hold long. Ash filled their lungs, burning their throats. Still, the sight of soldiers standing against the storm gave hope to some, even as others cursed them for blocking escape. The army's discipline, so feared in battle, was powerless against a mountain's wrath. As hours passed, the ash grew deeper. It buried streets, toppled roofs, and suffocated the air. Pompeii's citizens fought to survive, but each breath was a struggle. Some tied cloths over their mouths, but the air burned their throats. Others collapsed where they stood, their lungs filling with ash. Families clung together in doorways, whispering prayers as their homes crumbled. Merchants wept over abandoned treasures, realizing gold could not save them. Children cried, until their voices broke, then fell silent in their mother's arms. The elderly, too weak to flee, sat quietly, resigned to their fate. The ash, falling endlessly, seemed to muffle the city's cries. Pompeii, once vibrant and alive, was slowly silenced. One breath, one life at a time, as ash piled higher outside. Many families retreated into their homes. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, and oil lamps flickered weakly in the darkness. With escape impossible, some sought comfort in the simplest ritual: a meal. In kitchens filled with falling soot, bread was broken. Mothers passed figs to their children, fathers poured the last of their wine, and grandparents whispered prayers before eating. The meal was not of celebration but of farewell. One final attempt to hold on to normal life as the world collapsed around them. Some families sat silently, staring at one another, memorizing faces in the dim lamplight. Others tried to smile, telling children stories to distract them from the thunder outside. The crack of collapsing roofs and distant screams broke through the night, but inside they clung to each other. Go. The smell of smoke and ash mixed with the aroma of bread and olives. For a moment, Pompeii was both a city of death and a city of life. Families refusing to surrender their humanity, even as fate closed in. These were the last meals of Pompeii, preserved forever in kitchens buried beneath the ash. The voices of Pompeii's children pierced the night. In narrow alleys they cried for parents lost in the chaos. In homes they whimpered as the air thickened with ash. Some clutched dolls, others wooden toys, their small fingers trembling. Mothers tried to comfort them, whispering lullabies, covering their mouths with cloth. Fathers carried them on shoulders, stumbling through debris. But many little voices grew weaker, fading into silence as lungs filled with ash. Not all cries were of fear. Some were of bravery. A boy led his younger sister by the hand through the smoke, urging her to keep walking. A group of children tried to play dice inside a villa. pretending nothing was wrong. Their courage, small yet shining, stood against the terror of the night, yet the mountain showed no mercy. Pompeii's children, the city's most innocent voices, were silenced one by one. Amid the chaos, two young lovers, Lucia and Marcellus, found one another. Earlier separated in the panic, they now clung together in a collapsed courtyard. Their faces were streaked with ash, their clothes torn, but their eyes burned with fierce devotion. They knew there was no escape. The streets were blocked, the air unbreathable. Together they held hands, whispering words drowned by the roar of the volcano. They swore eternal love, not in life but in death. Marcellus wrapped his arm around Lucia, shielding her as ash poured in. She pressed her face against his chest, tears mixing with soot. "We will not be parted," she whispered. He kissed her hair, holding her as the darkness closed in. Centuries later, their embrace would be discovered, their bodies preserved in ash, testament to love unbroken even in the face of destruction. The city itself began to fall. Roofs groaned under the weight of ash and pumice until they collapsed in violent crashes. Walls split apart, sending mosaics and frescoes tumbling to the ground. Statues of gods fell from their pedestals, shattering in the streets. The Forum, once the proud heart of the city, was buried under stone. The amphitheater cracked and crumbled, its arches collapsing into rubble. The temples, once filled with incense and prayer, now echoed with silence as their roofs gave way. Citizens were crushed beneath falling debris, trapped in alleys blocked by stone. Fires spread through villas, igniting wooden beams and filling the air with thick smoke. The cries of the living mixed with the crash of destruction. Pompeii was not just dying, it was collapsing into dust. The last and most deadly surge descended from Vesuvius. A wave of superheated gas and ash moving faster than the wind. It roared like thunder, devouring everything in its path. Those still alive barely had time to scream. The surge swept through Pompeii, burning, suffocating, and freezing its people in place. Bodies collapsed where they stood, their final moments preserved in stone like ash. Families huddled together in doorways. Lovers embraced. Priests clutched idols. Soldiers died with swords in hand. The city was silenced in an instant. The surge buried Pompeii under meters of ash, sealing its story. Where once there had been laughter, trade, and life, there was now only silence, an entire city frozen in time. When the final surge passed, silence descended over Pompeii. The city that once rang with voices, laughter, and prayers was gone, buried beneath a suffocating blanket of ash and stone. The streets were still. Roofs, markets, temples, and homes lay under meters of volcanic debris. Bodies, caught in their final moments, were sealed forever. Families huddled together, lovers entwined, children clutching toys. Pompeii had not simply been destroyed, it had been preserved in its death. Mount Vesuvius, still rumbling, loomed over the desolate landscape. Smoke curled lazily into the sky, a grim reminder of its wrath. The land around the mountain was transformed into a gray wasteland. Vineyards, once green with grapes, were gone. Farms and villages were erased, their names remembered only in whispers. Survivors who had fled looked back in horror. From a distance, there was no trace of the city, only a vast gray desert stretching to the horizon. It was as though Pompeii had been swallowed, whole, erased from existence in a single day. Yet beneath the ash, the city remained, silent, intact, waiting for centuries to tell its story again. Beneath the heavy layers of ash, Pompeii was sealed away, its final moments captured like an eternal photograph. Unlike other ruined cities, lost to war or fire, Pompeii was preserved, not destroyed. Walls still stood, frescoes remained on villa walls, mosaics glimmered under the ash, and bread sat half-baked in ovens. Most haunting of all were the people. The ash had hardened around their bodies, leaving voids that centuries later would reveal their shapes. Children curled beside their mothers, soldiers slumped with swords in hand, and slaves still chained where their masters had abandoned them. Lovers clung together in their last embrace. These shapes, twisted in fear and pain, told a story no historian could write. The silence was absolute. The city's heartbeat had stopped, yet its memory was sealed perfectly, waiting for rediscovery. Pompeii was frozen in time, preserved not by choice but by tragedy. For years, then decades, then centuries, Pompeii lay forgotten. The land around it healed, vines returned to the soil, and villages rose again. To travelers, the site looked like nothing more than rolling hills of grey stone and earth. Nature covered the scars. Grass grew over the ash, trees rooted in the hardened soil, and shepherds grazed their flocks atop the buried city, never knowing the world beneath their feet. The mountain itself quieted, though it remained a sleeping giant, looming over the bay. The people of Rome and later generations forgot Pompeii's exact fate. Some said it had been swallowed by the gods, punished for its decadence. Others whispered of a cursed city, buried beneath the mountain, with no survivors to tell the tale. Pompeii's story faded into legend. The earth moved on, indifferent to the lives it had buried. But Pompeii remained beneath, silent and waiting. Generations passed. Rome fell, empires rose and collapsed, yet Pompeii remained silent under the earth. Travelers passed through the region, never suspecting the hidden city beneath their feet. Locals told stories of a cursed land, a place where the gods had destroyed a city for its sins. Legends of Pompeii became myths, its true story erased by time. Farmers plowed fields above buried streets, unaware of frescoed villas just below their tools. Children played, never knowing their laughter echoed over a city of the dead. Even when earthquakes rattled the land again, Pompeii remained untouched, sealed away. The world forgot it, but the city endured in silence. Waiting to speak once more, though forgotten, Pompeii was never truly lost. Farmers sometimes unearthed strange objects while digging: shards of painted pottery, fragments of statues, coins with unfamiliar emperors' faces. They puzzled over these relics, then tucked them away or sold them to passing merchants. Stories grew of treasures hidden beneath the earth. Some said a golden city lay buried near Vesuvius, guarded by the gods. Others whispered that the land itself cursed those who dug too deep. Superstitions mingled with curiosity, creating an air of mystery around the region. Beneath the soil, Pompeii remained intact, its secrets pressing against the earth like whispers waiting to be heard. For nearly 17 centuries, the city waited in silence until chance and human curiosity would finally bring it back to light. 17 centuries after Pompeii's burial, the silence was broken. In Ciserba, workers digging near the town of Resina uncovered strange walls beneath the soil. At first, they thought it was a forgotten ruin. But as excavation continued, frescoes emerged, vivid colors untouched by time, mosaics gleaming as if freshly laid. Archaeologists marveled. Streets, villas, and temples were uncovered piece by piece. Statues stood where they had fallen. Amphorae still lined shelves, and inscriptions were carved clearly into stone. For the first time, the world could see a Roman city preserved in its final moment. The most haunting discoveries were the bodies, hollow spaces in the ash, later filled with plaster, revealing the final shapes of Pompeii's people. Mothers clutching children, lovers embracing, dogs curled at their masters' feet. The tragedy of Pompeii was no longer legend, it was real. its pain captured forever. Europe was stunned. Writers, artists, and philosophers flocked to see the city of the dead. Pompeii became not just an archaeological wonder, but a mirror of mortality, showing how fragile even the greatest civilizations could be. Remarkably, as excavations expanded, Pompeii's daily life emerged from the ash. Frescoes of gods, banquets, and lovers decorated the walls. Graffiti appeared on nearly every surface. Humorous insults, political slogans, poems of love. Shops still held their wares, amphorae of wine, loaves of bread carbonized in ovens, jewelry resting where it had been dropped. These discoveries revealed not just how Pompeii died, but how it lived. Scholars could now see Roman streets, homes, and art as if the people had only stepped out moments before the eruption. The city spoke again through its walls and its objects. Visitors walked Pompeii's streets in awe, hearing the whispers of its past. Every fresco, every coin, every inscription echoed the voices of those who once thrived here. Voices silenced but never erased, Pompeii became more than an archaeological site. It became a warning. The eruption of Vesuvius revealed nature's power to erase entire cities in a single day. Scholars pointed to Pompeii as a lesson in human fragility. The city showed how civilization, wealth, and culture could vanish under the force of the earth. It reminded humanity that empires fall, riches fade, but nature endures. Pompeii's story echoed across the world. Prepare for disaster, respect the power of the earth, and never forget the price of arrogance. Yet Pompeii also revealed resilience. From its ruins, humanity gained knowledge, art, and insight. The people of Pompeii, though silenced, taught future generations through what they left behind. The lesson of Pompeii is not only death, but remembrance. Today, Pompeii stands as one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites in the world. Visitors walk its streets, tracing the same paths once taken by Romans nearly 2,000 years ago. Villas, temples, theaters, and shops remain, their walls speaking of lives long gone. The plaster casts of victims rest in glass cases, haunting reminders of that final day. Frescoes glow with color, graffiti whispers with humor, and the amphitheater still echoes with imagined cheers. Pompeii is not only a monument to tragedy, but to memory. It belongs to the world, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that welcomes millions each year. Tourists walk silently, awestruck, some wiping tears as they imagine the voices of those who lived and died here. The city lives again, not in flesh but in history. Pompeii is gone, yet it endures. Buried in a single day, it has lived for millennia through memory, history, and discovery. Its story is not only one of destruction, but of preservation. How a city silenced in ash became eternal. The people of Pompeii live again through their frescoes, their graffiti, their artifacts, and their preserved final moments. They remind us that life is fragile, yet memory is enduring. Pompeii stands as both a tragedy and a triumph, a tragedy of human lives lost, and a triumph of history's ability to keep them alive. The city whispers still. In every broken wall, in every mosaic, in every plaster cast, the voices of Pompeii echo across time. They ask us to remember them, not as shadows of death, but as people who lived, laughed, loved, and dreamed under the shadow of a mountain. Pompeii was buried, but it will never die. It is the city that lives forever